He told her the baby wasn't his and walked away, but 2 years later, his daughter's smile shattered his world. Emily had never felt so small in her life as she did standing in Daniel's office that evening. The city light spread behind him like a crown of power, his tall frame outlined by the glass wall of the skyscraper. He looked every bit the part of the ruthless CEO, his dark hair carefully styled, his sharp suit perfect, his piercing blue eyes reflecting both intelligence and coldness. She had rehearsed her words over and over in her head on the way there, gripping the strap of her worn purse tightly as if it could hold her together. Still, when the moment came, her voice trembled. She told him she was pregnant, that she was carrying his child. For a heartbeat, she hoped to see some flicker of warmth in his eyes, some sign of the man she once thought she knew. Instead, his lips curved into a smirk that sent a chill through her chest. "Not mine," he said flatly, the words slicing through the fragile hope she carried. His voice carried the same finality he used in boardrooms when he closed deals, and there was no room for negotiation. Emily's heart sank as she stared at him, unable to comprehend how easily he could dismiss them. She wanted to reach out, to make him understand that this wasn't a mistake or a trick. But the way he folded his arms, the way he avoided her eyes, told her the wall had already gone up, higher than anything she could climb. She tried to speak again, but her throat tightened, and her words stumbled out broken and weak. He didn't listen. Instead, he moved toward the door, opened it, and gestured for her to leave as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Emily stepped out into the hall, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might collapse. The sound of the door shutting behind her echoed like a verdict. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to cry in front of his employees, who passed by with curious glances. She held her head high as she left the building, even though inside she was shattering. The cool night air hit her cheeks as she walked out into the street, and it felt cruel that the world could go on as if nothing had happened while her life had just been destroyed. Every dream she had built in her heart came crashing down with his smirk and those 2 words. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and pressed a hand to her stomach. She was terrified and alone, but she wasn't entirely alone. There was a life inside her, and she realized that no matter how badly Daniel had rejected them, she could not, would not, give up on her child. That tiny spark growing within her gave her a reason to move forward, even if it meant walking away from the man she once thought would be her forever. That night, as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling with tears sliding down her cheeks, Emily made herself a promise. She would find the strength to raise this child. She would work harder than she ever had, sacrifice everything if she had to. Daniel might have turned his back on them, but she would not let that define their lives. It would hurt, God, it already hurt more than she thought she could endure, but she would not let her child grow up feeling unwanted. She whispered to her unborn baby in the quiet darkness, promising to be both mother and father, protector and provider, no matter how impossible it seemed. And even though fear clawed at her, a quiet determination began to take root inside her chest. The weeks after that night blurred into a haze of exhaustion and fear, but Emily forced herself to keep moving because there was no one else to lean on and no safety net to fall into. Her small apartment felt colder and lonelier than ever, yet she tried to transform it into a place of comfort, lighting candles in the evenings and covering the peeling wallpaper with photographs and reminders that she was not as broken as she felt. The nausea of early pregnancy often left her curled on the bathroom floor in the mornings, but once the sickness passed, she dragged herself up, washed her face, and went to work. She held on to the steady rhythm of her job as a waitress, the clatter of dishes and the hum of customers giving her a distraction from the thoughts that haunted her each night. Her co-workers whispered about her growing stomach, some kind and supportive, others cruel in their speculation, but she learned to tune them out, focusing only on the tips she needed to save and the meals she needed to afford. Despite the struggle, Emily found moments of unexpected strength. She learned how to budget carefully, cutting back on everything non-essential, and spent nights researching clinics and prenatal care options she could afford. Sometimes she would walk through the park on her way home, placing her hand on her stomach as if the baby inside could hear her promises whispered into the night air. She told her child about the stars, about dreams she once had, and about the future she would build for them together. The more she spoke aloud to the tiny life growing inside her, the more she began to believe she could keep those promises. It was not easy, her body ached, her savings dwindled, and the loneliness threatened to consume her, but she pushed forward, reminding herself daily that her child deserved love and stability, no matter how hard the path became. As her belly grew, so did her determination. By the second trimester, the movements of her baby filled her with a strange mix of fear and wonder. Each flutter reminded her that she wasn't just surviving for herself anymore but for someone who depended on her entirely. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, her eyes more tired but her resolve sharper. Nights of crying into her pillow slowly gave way to nights of quiet planning, mapping out what the next year might look like, how she would afford childcare, and which part-time classes she could take to secure a better job in the future. She had no family to guide her, no partner to share the burden, but she carried herself with a silent pride that surprised even her. Still, there were moments when doubt clawed at her, moments when she replayed Daniel's smirk in her mind and felt the sting of rejection all over again. She would wonder if he ever thought of her, if he ever wondered about the child he had dismissed so cruelly. On her darker days, she imagined bumping into him on the street, imagined him looking at her rounded belly with regret, imagined him realizing the truth he had refused to accept. But those thoughts were dangerous, because they stirred emotions she could not afford to feel. She learned to shut them away and remind herself that she and her child were enough, even without him. When her due date finally approached, Emily felt equal parts terror and anticipation. She spent the nights folding tiny clothes she had bought secondhand, staring at the crib she had pieced together in the corner of her bedroom, and praying that she would find the strength to be everything her child needed. She had no illusions about how hard it would be, but the idea of holding her baby in her arms gave her hope she hadn't felt in a long time. And as she lay awake listening to the hum of the city outside her window, she whispered into the silence once again, promising her child that no matter how much the world had taken from her, she would never let it take away the love she carried in her heart. The day Lily was born began not with a sense of magic but with fear that clawed at Emily's chest like a vice. She had been alone in her apartment when the first sharp wave of pain coursed through her body, doubling her over and sending a glass of water tumbling to the floor. For a moment she stood frozen, clutching her stomach, realizing with an icy clarity that the time had come. Panic set in as she looked around the small space with no one to call, no family to lean on, no man waiting nervously to rush her to the hospital. She stuffed the small bag she had packed weeks earlier with trembling hands, slipped on her worn shoes, and hailed a cab with tears blurring her eyes. The driver didn't ask questions, perhaps he saw the fear on her face, perhaps he had seen this kind of desperation before. At the hospital, the harsh fluorescent lights and the sterile smell made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. Nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency, their voices firm yet kind, guiding her to breathe through the contractions, to focus on the rhythm of her body. But the reality of being alone pressed down heavier than the weight of the pain. She glanced at the doorway more than once, half expecting to see Daniel burst in, his blue eyes wide with guilt and panic, but he never came. Each contraction reminded her of his absence, each scream carried the echo of his rejection. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a stronger voice began to push back, whispering that she didn't need him, that she could bring this child into the world on her own. Hours stretched into what felt like an eternity. Sweat clung to her skin, and exhaustion blurred her thoughts, but she clung to the encouragement of the nurse who squeezed her hand and told her she was stronger than she knew. Emily bore down with every ounce of willpower left in her, her body trembling as if it would split apart, until finally, in the early hours of the morning, a cry filled the room. The sound was raw, sharp, and beautiful, slicing through the haze of pain and exhaustion. They placed the tiny bundle against her chest, and Emily felt her heart stop and then start again, beating stronger than it ever had. She looked down at the small face framed with wisps of dark hair, at the piercing blue eyes that blinked up at her with innocence and trust, and her tears flowed freely. The nurse asked if she had chosen a name, and Emily whispered Lily, her voice catching as if the name had been waiting inside her all along. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and felt something shift inside her. All the rejection, all the pain of the last 9 months, seemed to fade in the warmth of her daughter's tiny body. She was not alone anymore. She had been abandoned, yes, but now she had been given something infinitely more valuable than the man who had cast her aside. She had a purpose, a reason to fight, a love so fierce it scared her with its intensity. As the hours passed and the hospital room grew quieter, Emily studied her daughter's features, tracing the shape of her little nose, the curve of her lips, and the unmistakable reflection of Daniel's eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, and though it broke her heart, it also filled her with a strange sense of triumph. He had denied her, denied them, but here was proof of the truth, alive and breathing in her arms. She promised Lily that night, under the dim glow of the hospital lamp, that she would never let her feel unwanted, that she would never repeat the cruelty they had endured. Her voice was hoarse, her body exhausted, but her soul was steadier than it had ever been. Emily drifted in and out of sleep in the chair by the crib, waking each time Lily stirred, each time her cries pierced the stillness. It was overwhelming, terrifying even, but there was an odd kind of peace in it too. For the first time in months, Emily wasn't haunted by loneliness, she was consumed by the weight of a new responsibility, one she embraced fully. As dawn broke and sunlight filtered through the blinds, she realized her life had changed forever. It wasn't the life she had once imagined, standing beside a powerful man in tailored suits, but it was something far more meaningful. She was a mother, and no rejection, no smirk, no cruel words could ever take that away from her. The first year with Lily was a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and quiet moments that stitched themselves into Emily's memory like fragile threads of hope. The apartment, though small and worn, became a sanctuary filled with the sound of tiny cries, soft lullabies, and the creak of the rocking chair she had bought secondhand. Emily quickly learned that being a mother was both the hardest and the most rewarding thing she had ever done. There were nights when Lily's cries seemed endless, when Emily sat on the edge of her bed rocking her until her arms ached, whispering soothing words through her own tears of exhaustion. Yet in the early morning hours, when Lily's little hand curled tightly around her finger, Emily felt a surge of strength that reminded her why she had to keep going. Money was tight, tighter than Emily ever thought possible. She returned to waitressing just a few weeks after giving birth, leaving Lily in the care of a kind older neighbor who charged little but treated the baby as if she were her own grandchild. Every dollar Emily earned went into rent, formula, and second-hand clothes that Lily quickly outgrew. There were days when Emily skipped meals so her daughter would never go hungry, but she hid the sacrifices behind a smile whenever she looked into Lily's wide blue eyes. The more she saw those eyes, the harder it became to ignore the truth of their origin. They were Daniel's eyes, clear as day, a reflection of the man who had turned his back on them. Strangers would sometimes comment on Lily's striking features, how unusual it was for such a small child to have such sharp blue eyes, and Emily would smile politely while a storm raged quietly inside her. By the time Lily was a toddler, her personality began to shine. She was curious about everything, pointing at books and demanding to know what the pictures meant, tugging at Emily's hand to lead her toward playgrounds, laughing with a joy so pure it softened even Emily's darkest moments. Emily would sit on the park bench watching her daughter play, sometimes overhearing parents whispering to each other about how much the little girl looked like someone they couldn't quite place. Emily feared the day someone would connect the resemblance to Daniel, feared the whispers that could spread into truths she wasn't ready to confront. She still avoided places where she might run into him, keeping her world small and safe, even if it meant missing out on opportunities that might have eased her struggles. There were nights when she lay awake listening to Lily's soft breathing, wondering how different life might have been if Daniel had believed her, if he had stayed. She thought of the way his smirk had cut her down, the finality in his tone, and it fueled her anger. Yet as much as she told herself she hated him, a part of her longed for him to see what he had walked away from. That longing made her feel weak, and so she buried it under layers of determination. She promised herself again and again that she didn't need him, that Lily didn't need him, that they were stronger without him. And in many ways they were, yet the resemblance between father and daughter grew stronger with each passing day, and Emily knew deep down that someday Daniel would see it too. As Lily grew more vocal, she began to ask innocent questions about fathers, questions sparked by what she saw in books or noticed in the families around her. Emily would answer carefully, gently explaining that some families looked different, that some children had only a mother, and that it was still a family full of love. Lily seemed to accept the explanation, but Emily couldn't shake the fear of the day when she would want more answers, when she would demand to know who her father was and why he wasn't there. The thought haunted Emily as she worked double shifts, as she tucked her daughter into bed, as she walked past expensive restaurants where she sometimes imagined Daniel dining, unaware of the life growing up just a few blocks away. One rainy afternoon, as Emily carried groceries back to the apartment with Lily holding tightly to her hand, she caught their reflection in a store window. She froze for a moment, struck by the undeniable truth staring back at her. The little girl with dark hair and bright blue eyes beside her looked so much like Daniel that Emily's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just her imagination anymore, it was undeniable. She leaned down and kissed the top of Lily's head, whispering that she was perfect, that she was loved, and that nothing in the world could change that. Inside, though, Emily felt the ground shifting. She could ignore the resemblance, she could deny the whispers, but she knew the day would come when their two worlds would collide again, and nothing would ever be the same. It happened on a night that Emily would never forget, though she had not planned for anything out of the ordinary. Her friend had convinced her to attend a charity event at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, insisting that she needed an evening away from work and responsibility, that even a struggling mother deserved to feel like herself again. Emily was reluctant, but she agreed after arranging for Lily to stay with her trusted neighbor for the night. She borrowed a simple but elegant dress from her friend, styled her dark hair carefully, and for the first time in years allowed herself to feel beautiful. She had no idea that the evening would mark the moment when her past and present would collide in a way she could never have imagined. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and the buzz of wealthy guests exchanging hollow pleasantries. Emily felt out of place, her heart beating fast as she clutched a glass of water and wandered near the edges of the crowd. She told herself she would stay for an hour and then leave, slipping back into her quiet life unnoticed. But as she turned to move toward the refreshment table, her gaze locked on a familiar figure across the room. Daniel. He was surrounded by a small group of men in sharp suits, his presence commanding as always, his dark hair immaculate, his piercing blue eyes surveying the room with authority. He looked almost exactly as he had years ago, perhaps a little older, perhaps more polished, but the effect he had on her was instant and devastating. Emily froze in place, her stomach twisting painfully. She wanted to run, to disappear into the crowd, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. Memories surged, his smirk, his denial, the crushing moment when he told her the child wasn't his. She had spent years trying to erase that night, to build a life without him, yet here he was, larger than life, and her heart betrayed her by racing faster. For a few seconds, she believed he hadn't noticed her, but then his gaze shifted and landed directly on her. The smile on his lips faltered, and a flicker of something, confusion, recognition, perhaps even shock, crossed his face. Emily's instinct was to flee, but her feet felt rooted to the marble floor. Daniel excused himself from his group and walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Every click of his polished shoes on the floor echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. When he finally reached her, his expression was unreadable, though his eyes searched her face as though trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he had cast aside. Emily managed to whisper a polite greeting, her voice tight, her throat dry. Daniel returned the greeting, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. There was hesitation there, something uncharacteristic for a man who always seemed so sure of himself. They spoke briefly, their words stiff and formal at first. He asked how she had been, and she forced a smile, answering that life had been busy but fulfilling. She didn't mention Lily, though the thought of her daughter burned at the back of her throat with every passing second. Daniel seemed to sense there was something left unsaid. His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have, and Emily noticed the way his brow furrowed slightly, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. The tension was unbearable, and Emily excused herself, claiming she needed some air. She slipped out onto the balcony, clutching the railing and breathing deeply, trying to steady herself. But fate wasn't finished with her that night. A photograph on her phone lit up the screen when she checked for messages, a picture of Lily that her neighbor had sent earlier, smiling with messy hair and clutching a toy in her small hand. Emily's breath caught as she stared at it, her heart filling with both love and fear. She didn't hear Daniel step onto the balcony until he was only a few feet away. He glanced at her phone, and for just a second his eyes caught the image of the little girl. His jaw tightened, his expression shifted, and Emily quickly turned the screen away. He asked her who the child was, his voice low, controlled, but tinged with something raw underneath. Emily hesitated, her lips parting but no words coming out, her silence louder than any answer she could have given. In that moment she saw a flash of realization in his eyes, fleeting but powerful. He didn't press her further, not that night, but the way he looked at her as she slipped past him to leave told her that questions had been planted, questions that would not go unanswered for long. She walked out of that hotel with her heart pounding and her mind racing, knowing that the careful life she had built, the delicate walls she had raised to protect her daughter and herself, were about to crack. Daniel could not sleep the night after the charity event, his mind circling back again and again to the image he had glimpsed on Emily's phone. It was not just that the child was beautiful, or that Emily's reaction to his question had been evasive, but the features he thought he had recognized in that little face. He tried to dismiss it as coincidence, to convince himself that his imagination was playing tricks on him, but no matter how many times he reasoned with himself, the image of those bright blue eyes and familiar lines in the child's expression haunted him. He poured himself a drink, sat in his immaculate penthouse with the city sprawling beneath him, and realized for the first time in years that he felt out of control. He had built an empire on decisiveness, on clarity and precision, but now his thoughts were a storm of doubt and suspicion. The next day, he found himself distracted in meetings, his usual sharpness dulled by the gnawing questions. His assistants noticed, his board members noticed, but he brushed them off with clipped remarks, refusing to let them glimpse the turmoil inside him. When the day finally ended, instead of going home, he instructed his driver to take him to the neighborhood where he thought Emily lived. He did not even know for certain if she was still there, but something compelled him to search. He sat in the car for nearly an hour, scanning the streets, until at last he saw her. She was carrying grocery bags, her hair pulled back, looking exhausted but still carrying herself with the quiet dignity he remembered. And walking beside her was the child. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The little girl was no more than 2, her small hand wrapped tightly around Emily's. She had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes so unmistakably blue that he felt as though he were staring into a mirror of his own. The resemblance was not imagined, it was glaring, undeniable. He sat frozen as his driver asked if he should continue, but Daniel waved him silent, unable to look away. The girl laughed at something Emily said, and even her smile carried a reflection of his own. It was like being hit by a wave, the truth slamming into him with full force. He was a father, and he had abandoned them. He didn't approach them that day. He couldn't. Shame and fear rooted him to his seat, leaving him to watch as Emily guided the child into the apartment building and disappeared from view. That night, he lay awake in bed again, the ceiling above him a blur as guilt and regret consumed him. He thought of the words he had said years ago, the smirk on his lips as he had denied her, the cruel dismissal that had sent her away. He had believed himself untouchable, immune to mistakes, and now that arrogance had cost him something he had never even allowed himself to imagine he wanted. The following days became a silent battle within him. He wanted to confront Emily, to demand answers, but what right did he have after what he had done? He wanted to see the child again, to hear her voice, to learn her name, but he knew it was not that simple. Instead, he began to find excuses to drive past her building, to linger in places where he thought he might catch a glimpse of them. Each time he saw the little girl, the resemblance only grew stronger, and each time Emily caught sight of him, her expression hardened into something that warned him not to come closer. She knew he was watching, and though she said nothing, her guarded glances told him that she would not let him back into her life easily. At night, he began writing letters he never sent, confessions on expensive stationery that he tore up in frustration. He tried to explain himself, to put into words the fear he had felt, the immaturity that had driven him to push her away, but the words always sounded hollow compared to the reality of what she had endured alone. For the first time, Daniel faced the possibility that all his wealth, his power, his influence, meant nothing in the face of the one thing he truly wanted, a chance to know his daughter. And he had no idea how to earn it. Meanwhile, Emily felt the pressure of his presence. She noticed him in the distance, sometimes in his sleek car, sometimes across the street, and it reignited all the anger and hurt she had buried. She had fought too hard to build a life for herself and Lily, to carve out a sense of peace from the wreckage of his betrayal, and the idea of letting him back in terrified her. Yet she could not ignore the truth either. Lily was his daughter, no matter how much she tried to shield her from it. She lay awake at night debating what was right, torn between protecting her little girl from the man who had wounded her so deeply and acknowledging that perhaps Lily deserved to know her father. The tension grew heavier with each passing day, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a storm about to break. Emily knew he would not stay in the shadows forever, just as Daniel knew he could not live another day without confronting what he had lost. The inevitable reckoning drew closer, and when it came, it would either shatter them completely or open the door to something neither of them had dared to imagine. Daniel could no longer keep his distance. Weeks of watching from afar had chipped away at his resolve until the longing to know his daughter outweighed the fear of rejection. One evening, as the city settled into its dusky glow and the streets outside Emily's building quieted, he told his driver to stop. His palms were sweating in a way they hadn't since his earliest days of negotiating deals, but this was no boardroom battle, and no amount of money or strategy could guarantee the outcome. He stepped out of the car, his heart pounding with each step toward the entrance, rehearsing words that sounded inadequate even in his mind. When Emily appeared, holding Lily's small hand as they returned from a walk, he froze at the sight of them together. Lily wore a little blue dress that brought out her eyes, and when she laughed at something her mother said, the sound pierced him straight through. For a fleeting moment he thought of turning and running, but then Lily glanced up and saw him. Her blue eyes locked on his, and something shifted in the air. She didn't know who he was, not truly, but children had a way of sensing what adults tried to ignore. Her head tilted curiously, and her lips curved into the faintest smile before she hid shyly behind her mother's leg. That simple gesture sent a wave of emotion crashing over Daniel so strong he nearly staggered. Emily noticed his presence then, her entire body tensing, her hand tightening protectively around Lily's. The look she gave him was sharp, full of warning and anger, but also shadowed by something he couldn't quite name. He raised his hand slightly, as though to show he meant no harm, and forced himself to speak. His voice came out rougher than he intended, trembling with the weight of all the words he hadn't said for years. "Emily, please," he began, his eyes darting briefly to the child who peeked at him from behind her mother. "I know I don't deserve this, but I need to talk to you. Just a moment. Please." Emily hesitated, torn between slamming the door in his face and allowing him to speak. The years of hurt and betrayal flared in her chest, reminding her of the night he had dismissed her, the arrogance in his tone as he denied responsibility. She wanted to tell him to go back to his world of wealth and power, to leave them alone, but when she looked at Lily she knew the decision wasn't only hers anymore. She finally nodded curtly, motioning him toward a bench outside the building. They sat, Emily keeping Lily close on her lap, while Daniel struggled to find the words. The silence stretched unbearably until he spoke again. "I was wrong," he said simply, each syllable like gravel in his throat. "All those years ago, I was terrified. I thought I'd lose everything if I admitted what was real. I told myself it wasn't true because it was easier than facing what it would mean. But then I saw her, and I knew immediately. She's mine, isn't she?" His voice cracked as he glanced at Lily again. "She's our daughter." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. She wanted to stay strong, to protect herself from the man who had shattered her once, but the sincerity in his voice was unlike anything she had ever heard from him before. She felt her defenses waver, though her voice remained sharp. "Yes, she's yours," she whispered. "But where were you when I needed you most? Where were you when she was sick and I stayed up all night praying she'd be okay? Where were you when I couldn't pay the bills and thought I'd lose everything?" Her words hit him like blows, each one dragging him deeper into the pit of his guilt. He bowed his head, shame burning through him, and for the first time in his life Daniel Carter, powerful, untouchable, revered, looked utterly broken. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I thought being a father meant giving up everything I had worked for. But the truth is, without her, without you, all of it feels empty. I don't expect forgiveness, Emily, but I can't keep pretending I don't care. I love her, even if I've missed these years. And I love you, though I lost the right to say it long ago." The words hung between them, fragile and raw. Emily sat still, her heart warring with her head. She wanted to lash out, to remind him that love was not enough after years of abandonment, but when Lily wriggled in her lap and leaned toward Daniel with innocent curiosity, it was as though fate had answered for her. The little girl reached out a hand, small fingers brushing against his, and Daniel's breath caught as tears welled in his eyes. That single touch was more powerful than any argument, more undeniable than any denial he had once made. Emily's voice softened, though it trembled. "This isn't about me anymore. If you want to be in her life, you'll have to prove it. Not with money, not with promises, but with actions. And if you fail her, Daniel, I will never forgive you." He nodded vigorously, his chest tight with a mix of hope and terror. "I won't fail her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I swear it." That night, as Emily carried Lily inside, Daniel sat alone on the bench, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the depth of his regret and the possibility of redemption. It would not be easy, and he knew Emily would test him at every step, but as he thought of his daughter's small hand in his, he realized he would do anything to prove he was worthy of her. Daniel's world shifted completely after that first fragile connection with Lily. From that evening on, he became determined to prove that his promises were not hollow words but the beginning of something lasting. It was not a simple path, because Emily, hardened by years of struggle and disappointment, refused to let him step into their lives without showing consistency. She allowed him small, careful visits, and each one was like a test of whether he truly understood what being a father meant. Daniel accepted every condition without complaint. He arrived early, never late, brought no grand gifts to impress, only small tokens like children's books or crayons that Lily delighted in. For a man who once measured worth in stocks and contracts, it was humbling to realize how a child's laughter over a coloring book could feel like the greatest victory of his life. At first, Lily was shy with him. She would watch him curiously from across the room, holding tightly onto Emily's arm as if gauging whether this new presence could be trusted. Daniel didn't push. He simply stayed close, spoke gently, and showed her through actions that he was safe. It was weeks before she willingly climbed onto his lap, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, but when she did, Daniel felt his chest ache with an emotion he had almost forgotten existed. He read to her that day, stumbling a little over the voices he tried to invent for the characters, but her delighted giggles told him he was finally breaking through. Emily, standing in the doorway, saw the sight with conflicted emotions. She wanted to keep her walls up, but the sound of their daughter's laughter with her father stirred something deep within her that she could not silence. The transformation in Daniel extended far beyond the small apartment where Emily and Lily lived. For years he had run his company with ruthless precision, but now he found himself delegating more, choosing to attend Lily's preschool recital instead of yet another board meeting. At first his colleagues were shocked, unable to reconcile the man who once lived only for his empire with this version who cancelled a client dinner because he promised a bedtime story. Yet Daniel didn't care about their whispers, because for the first time in his life he felt like he was living for something real. The empire he had once thought he would lose by choosing family suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the warmth of a child curling into his arms at night. There were setbacks, moments when Emily's mistrust resurfaced, sharp words reminding him that a few good weeks did not erase years of absence. She watched him carefully, as though waiting for him to fail, and Daniel accepted it without anger because he knew she had every right to doubt. Instead of arguing, he doubled down on his efforts, showing up consistently, respecting her boundaries, and letting time prove his intentions. Gradually, Emily's icy exterior began to crack. She found herself noticing the way Daniel looked at Lily, not with guilt alone, but with genuine adoration and wonder. She remembered the man he used to be, arrogant and cold, and marveled at the change. She couldn't deny that he was different now, and though forgiveness was not yet complete, the possibility began to take root. The defining moment came on a stormy evening when Lily fell ill with a high fever. Panic gripped Emily as she rushed around the apartment trying to soothe her daughter, and without hesitation, she called Daniel. Within minutes he was there, kneeling beside the bed, his expensive suit damp from the rain, his face pale with worry. He stayed the entire night, holding cold compresses to Lily's forehead, whispering comforting words, refusing to leave even when Emily urged him to rest. When morning came and Lily's fever broke, Daniel wept quietly, overwhelmed by relief. Emily watched him then, truly watched, and realized that he was no longer the man who had abandoned them years ago. Something inside her softened irrevocably at the sight. In the months that followed, their dynamic began to change. Emily allowed him to take Lily for weekends, and those short visits grew into longer ones. The three of them began sharing small family moments, picnics in the park, dinners at cozy restaurants, even quiet evenings at home watching movies. It was awkward at first, a patchwork family learning to find its rhythm, but over time those moments stitched together into something whole. Daniel found himself laughing more than he had in years, the weight of his old loneliness lifting as he embraced this new life. For Emily, it was a slow healing, a cautious trust rebuilding itself piece by piece, but she couldn't deny the joy of watching Lily grow up with the father she had always deserved. 2 years after that first fragile meeting, Daniel planned something he never thought he would have the courage to do again. In the very restaurant where fate had once delivered his daughter into his life, he arranged a quiet dinner. Emily arrived with Lily, not knowing his intentions, and as the evening unfolded, Daniel rose from his seat, his hands trembling but his voice steady. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with humility and love, and spoke words that carried the weight of his transformation. "I once told you I would lose everything if I chose you. I was wrong. With you and Lily, I gained everything I never knew I was missing. I don't just want to be part of her life. I want to be part of yours, if you'll let me. Will you give us another chance, together, as a family?" Emily's breath caught, her heart pounding as memories of their past warred with the undeniable truth of the present. She saw the man before her, not the cold millionaire who had once turned her away, but a father who had fought to reclaim his place and a partner who had finally learned the value of love. Tears filled her eyes as she glanced at Lily, who beamed up at her parents with innocent hope, and in that moment Emily knew her answer. She nodded, a smile breaking through her tears, and Daniel's heart soared with a joy he had once thought forever lost. Their story did not erase the past, but it transformed it. Out of pain had come growth, out of abandonment had come redemption, and out of regret had come a love stronger than either of them had ever known. Daniel had once feared family would cost him everything, but now, as he embraced Emily and Lily in the restaurant where his life had changed, he realized he had found the only treasure that mattered.